Hey YouTubers, this is the Gold Standard 924 coming at you with another video for you guys today. So basically picking up where I left off from my previous video, this is going to be my top 10 favorite SummerSlam matches of the past decade. Now in the previous video I did a top 10 favorite SummerSlam matches of the 1990s. So doing a follow-up video for this series, this is going to be my top 10 favorite SummerSlam matches of the 2000s. Now, before I get started, I also want to take this opportunity to make note of my honorable mentions. Some of the matches that unfortunately were unable to make the countdown. So, 5 matches that are my favorites that are featured in my honorable mentions list include Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio from SummerSlam 2002, the hardcore title match between Shane McMahon and Steve Blackman from SummerSlam 2000, Hulk Hogan vs. Shawn Michaels from SummerSlam 2005, Rock vs. Booker T from SummerSlam 2001, and Eddie Guerrero vs. Kurt Angle from SummerSlam 2004. So now that's out of the way, might as well kick off this video with my top 10 favorite SummerSlam matches of the 2000s. So coming in at number 10, I have on this list is the World Heavyweight title bout between the champion Chris Benoit defending the belt against Randy Orton from SummerSlam 2004. Now this match is obviously forgotten due to the circumstances surrounding Chris Benoit, but this match was pretty significant, especially since this would be the pay-per-view where Randy Orton would win his first World Heavyweight title. There wasn't necessarily really that much build leading into the show, but basically Randy Orton was just coming off of an IC title defense against Edge. Unfortunately, he came up short against Edge. So they did, however, have a rematch the Raw after Vengeance, and Orton was unable to successfully regain the Intercontinental title. So then they ended up doing a Battle Royal match on Raw to determine the number one contender to face Chris Benoit for the World Heavyweight title, in which Randy Orton last eliminating Chris Jericho to earn that opportunity. So this basically leads to this match, and the match was actually pretty good and some really good meshing between the two wrestlers, emphasizing more on their mat-based wrestling. And this was pretty low on my list considering, for what I had already mentioned regarding about Chris Benoit and the fact that WWE has pretty much haven't made any mention of him since the circumstances surrounding of his murder back in 2007. This was significant because Randy Orton would go on to win the World Heavyweight title and solidifying him as the potential next big thing to be in the WWE. Unfortunately, his title reign did not last long, however. He would lose the belt the following month to Triple H, who by this point, Triple H, Ric Flair, and Batista being part of Evolution, they eventually turn on Orton, so Orton ended up becoming the babyface to rebel against the group that made him, or the group that he used to side along with them, and eventually losing the belt to Triple H the following month at Unforgiven. The match itself, for what it was pretty good, and Orton was actually getting a lot of cheers, especially since this was in Canada, which is very ironic because that pay-per-view was pretty known for the fact that the crowd was supporting more of the heels as opposed to the baby faces, and Chris Benoit, despite the fact that this was in his home country, was getting booed for some reason, which I honestly didn't understand why. And Orton would successfully defeat Chris Benoit with a pretty cool counter. Benoit tried to do a cripple crossface. Orton reverses it into an RKO, and Orton successfully beats Benoit clean, no outside interference whatsoever, and becoming the World Heavyweight Champion for the first time. And there was also a post-match ending where Chris Benoit landed a handshake, showcasing some sportsmanship for Randy Orton and insisting that he'd be a man. And Orton eventually accepts the handshake and closes out the show as the new World Heavyweight Champion. So there was actually a lot of good stuff that was going on in the match, and especially in the post-match celebration. Now, Orton, being that he was being crowned the youngest World Heavyweight Champion, just to kind of a couple months after this, because Brock Lesnar before Orton had been considered the youngest World Heavyweight Champion in their company up to that point, and that record would be beaten by another young athlete at the time, being Randy Orton, since Lesnar had already been fired from the company, and basically WWE just wanted to kind of completely do everything in their power to sever any ties from Brock Lesnar whatsoever. And this match was definitely really enjoyable, and unfortunately it's pretty low on this list because there have been better matches personally, and I mean I still enjoyed it to a degree, even though maybe not as much as I used to. And adding the fact that Orton's World Heavyweight title reign was very short-lived, so I ranked it at number 10. Now, number 9, this is CM Punk versus Jeff Hardy from SummerSlam 2009. SmackDown was really in its A game, probably for the first time since Paul Heyman was the creative writer for SmackDown during the beginning years of the brand split. And just to see guys like, obviously with Jeff Hardy and CM Punk being the notable wrestlers as part of that SmackDown 6 revival. I would say it's an unofficial revival. But yeah, that was actually a pretty good roster during this time. Punk and Hardy did, however, really put a lot of prestige in the World Heavyweight title. CM Punk had won the Money in the Bank briefcase for the second straight WrestleMania, since back in those days, Money in the Bank would be an annual tradition thing at that pay-per-view, as opposed to, before having its own annual pay-per-view of its own. CM Punk would use that briefcase to cash in on Jeff Hardy to become a two-time World Heavyweight Champion. This slowly planted the seeds of a Punk and Jeff Hardy feud, which eventually led to Punk turning on Jeff Hardy, turning heel in the process. So this led to a series of matches that they had at Night of Champions and I think Great American Bash. But I mean, I know there's a lot of pay-per-views, and it's been a long time since I've looked back at some of the pay-per-views from the later half of the 2000s. But they did, however, had a series of matches leading into this. And CM Punk just basically putting down Jeff Hardy, and about how like all these little kids that look up to him despite the fact that he's a drug addict. And this further escalates into a TLC match at SummerSlam. And I definitely really enjoyed this match. I didn't get to watch this match in its original broadcasting. I did, however, manage to watch this match many years later, and it's definitely a pretty good match. Not my favorite of the many TLC matches that has happened over the years, but it's still a pretty good match. It took a little while for it to get going. We've seen Punk and Hardy just trying to outsmart each other, and like Jeff Hardy tried to go for like a body splash, and then Punk moving out of the way, so Jeff Hardy ends up crashing on the table. A couple table spots with like CM Punk going for a bulldog, and then Jeff Hardy lashes back and tossing Punk through a table of his own. And then there was a swanton bomb as well through the announce table. Really cool camera shot that they did, where it has like the entire crowd and just panning over the crowd when Jeff Hardy was climbing up the ladder. It's like one of the tallest ladders of that match. I think they did this also with Edge earlier that year at Royal Rumble. I'm pretty sure there was a similar spot that they did. And then Jeff Hardy did the exact same thing and doing a swanton bomb on top of CM Punk through the announce table. So there was actually some pretty cool stuff. And CM Punk did, however, go over Jeff Hardy and regain the World Heavyweight title. Now, I said regain because there were actually a couple instances during their feud where they actually traded belts. So in this case, CM Punk would go on to become a 3-time World Heavyweight Champion. And then the post-match ending, we have The Undertaker making a surprise appearance, because we haven't seen Undertaker since WrestleMania 25 with his match with Shawn Michaels. And so Taker makes a surprise appearance at the end of the show, and basically segueing way into the next pay-per-view where he and CM Punk would have 2 matches at Breaking Point and Hell in a Cell. I definitely really enjoyed this match. Maybe not as much compared to the other TLC matches during that time, but it's still a pretty good match. CM Punk, eventually he kind of went downhill for a little bit, especially from that feud with The Undertaker, and it really took a while for him to recover after losing the world title. And he would go on to for the Straight Edge Society. I was going to say Black Label Society. Yeah, CM Punk would go on to form his faction for a little while, and then, led the Nexus, then going on to do the Pipe Bomb, since Punk, by the time we got to 2011, he just wasn't satisfied with the direction that he was going through in the WWE. and that basically rejuvenated his wrestling career for a little while. Jeff Hardy would leave the company shortly after this. They had like a steel cage match on SmackDown where if Jeff Hardy lost or where if one of them lost, then they would be forced to quit the WWE. And Jeff Hardy did, however, come up short in that match. But yeah, so I definitely really like this match, and that's why it's at number 9. Then we get to number 8, and this is also another ladder match, minus the tables and the chairs, but this also involved Jeff Hardy, and we're gonna backtrack over to early in the decade with his match against Rob Van Dam at SummerSlam 2001. Now, this was actually for the hardcore title, and this was in the midst of the invasion angle as well. I actually really liked this match. Also, another match I didn't get to see until many years later. Him and RVD actually had a really great match at the previous July pay-per-view Invasion. Jeff Hardy was still part of the Hardy Boys. Jeff and Matt hadn't broken up, but he was also venturing in singles competition, and he was going after the hardcore title. He had a pretty good match with RVD at the previous pay-per-view. They would go on a month later to make it even the better series of matches that they had, particularly here at SummerSlam. And yeah, I definitely really loved this match, and RVD was really hot during this time. I mean, the crowd really was engaged. And out of all the many wrestlers from that WCW, ECW influx during that time, RVD was the one that was getting consistently cheered despite being a heel. It really showed just how incredibly over RVD was, and it just felt at the time that he was going to go on to become the WWF champion at the time, or at least like a potential top key player of WWE. Unfortunately, things didn't really pan out that way, but when we had RVD first debuting in the WWF, I mean, it was just so surreal at the time. And him and Jeff Hardy literally tore the house down, as well as many other matches in SummerSlam 2001. I mean, if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you check it out. It really just to show just how much chemistry that these two wrestlers had, and they would eventually have a lot of series of matches later in the year, and even in 2002 when they had another ladder match, which it was like a unification match with the European and Intercontinental titles. RV and Jeff, these guys just, I mean, very similar wrestling styles, and both known for their high flying moves, and it just automatically clicked right then and there, and that's why it's at number 8. Then we have as number 7, and this was John Cena versus Batista from SummerSlam 2008. Now, this was also pretty interesting because this was actually the first time, particularly in WWE, not counting their run in LVW, which was the developmental program for WWE during that time. So they had like a little partnership going on. But Cena and Batista, as far as their history is concerned, is pretty interesting because both Cena and Batista debuted around the same year, 2002. Both debuted on SmackDown. They didn't really cross paths a whole lot, or if they never did cross paths at that time. But by the time Cena and Batista were just getting established, I mean, both wrestlers were on opposing brands. So Cena was on SmackDown. Batista would go on to move on to Raw, basically joining Evolution with Triple H, Ric Flair, and also another rookie in Randy Orton. So Batista and Cena, this was a time when the brand split, like you couldn't really cross paths from Raw and SmackDown once you got to like 2008, because by this time, Cena had been a multi-time WWE champion, Batista had been a multi-time World Heavyweight champion, and by the time Batista went back to Raw in 2008 after the 2008 draft, it was pretty clear that it was going to be a matter of time before Cena and Batista would cross paths and let alone have a potential marquee pay-per-view match. So they did it at SummerSlam, and in the weeks leading into that, Cena and Batista did, however, win the tag team titles along the way, and eventually losing those belts. But they would eventually have the match either way. It was surprisingly really enjoyable, even watching this match again, and I mean, Batista had all the offense, and Cena's being Cena, just getting his ass whooped, and then eventually making his traditional Superman comeback, and Batista just doing all he can to work on Cena's leg, and preventing Cena from doing the FU. Batista also did a figure four leg lock, so that kind of give you a little bit of a clue what he was going to do next. And ironically enough, being that Ric Flair's finisher was the figure four, and Batista and Flair were both part of Evolution, so basically paying subtle homage to Ric Flair, who retired earlier that year. I thought that was actually a nice continuity, a nice subtle nod there. Cena would eventually do all he can to make his comeback, and even try to lock in the STF and then doing the FU. The most memorable part of the match was when Cena tried to go for his top rope leg drop, and then Batista just immediately countered it into his Batista bomb, causing John Cena to rupture his neck. Cena eventually kicked out despite Batista taking the pinfall, and then Batista went on to give Cena a second Batista bomb to get the 3 count for him to win the match. I mean, Cena did eventually take some time off to kind of recover from that injury, and he would come back in November at Survivor Series. But yeah, I mean, this match was surprisingly enjoyable. Batista and Cena, when they did this encounter, they were both baby faces. They would eventually have another string of matches in 2010 when Batista went heel, and they were both fighting over for the WWE title. And then they would have the infamous "I Quit" match at Over the Limit. I was going to say Over the Edge, but Over the Limit, in which Batista would eventually leave the WWE for the next few years. John Cena will continue to have his massive success. And it's hard to believe 10 years later, now that Cena and Batista are starring in big motion picture movies. It's kind of really weird to just kind of think of that. If you thought of that 10 years ago, that Cena and Batista would venture out into acting, and Batista being successful in a movie with the Guardians of the Galaxy movie, John Cena just having his fair share of acting and numerous projects outside of WWE, and now that he's going to be starring in a Transformers reboot with the Bumblebee movie. So it's just very bizarre just to think, like, 10 years ago you would think that Cena and Batista would go on to do other projects outside the WWE, and they're also having their fair share of success. Then we get to number 6, and we're going to backtrack 5 years prior. And from SummerSlam 2003, I have the WWE title match between Kurt Angle, the champion, defending against Brock Lesnar. Now, this was basically the rematch from WrestleMania 19, in which Brock Lesnar defeated Kurt Angle to become the WWE champion. Kurt Angle did take time off to undergo some neck treatment, so he came back during the summer and won the WWE title back from Lesnar at Vengeance, and then they would have a match here at SummerSlam, only this time Brock Lesnar had turned heel in a cage match on SmackDown, where Brock was taking on Vince McMahon. Kurt was the guest referee. Brock turned on Kurt Angle, and it turns out to be all a ruse all along. Brock Lesnar believed that he was somewhat fatigued after being supposedly assaulted backstage. He was scheduled to fight Vince McMahon in the cage match, so there was a conspiracy going on between Brock and Vince. Brock had turned on Kurt Angle, and this kind of led to this match here. I actually thought this match was just as good, if not even better, than the WrestleMania 19 match. I mean, both guys were in 100% full health at this time. I mean, Kurt Angle did wrestle hurt at WrestleMania 19. Just to see Kurt Angle just make Brock Lesnar tap out was also a big monumental feat, since nobody in WWE at that point was able to make Brock Lesnar submit. And Kurt Angle, being the submissionist that he was, doing the unthinkable, or doing something that not a lot of wrestlers in the locker room were able to do up until that point. So that was a pretty big monumental feat for him. And Vince McMahon will also get involved with the match eventually, and getting his comeuppance thanks to Kurt Angle, and Angle would successfully retain the WWE title. Him and Brock Lesnar would have their infamous Iron Man match on SmackDown, and Lesnar going on to regain the belt. So I definitely really enjoyed that match, so that's why it's at number 6. Now, number 5, this is going to be from SummerSlam 2008, and this is the Hell in a Cell match between Undertaker and Edge. Now, surprisingly, even though There was no title involved in this match. This actually main evented SummerSlam that year. It closed out the show. And this was actually a feud that went on for about a year and a half, and it's just amazing just to see how far Taker and Edge, as far as their rivalry was going on during that time. And you got to go back to the summer of '07. Now, Edge had won the Money in the Bank from Mr. Kennedy. He would use that Money in the Bank to cash in on Undertaker, who had been the World Heavyweight Champion, and Edge would use that Money in the Bank clause to successfully defeat Taker in order to become the new World Heavyweight Champion. So Undertaker would actually have to sit out due to an injury during that time, and ironically, Edge would also fall victim. But their program was revived towards the tail end of '07. Taker and Batista had a match, also in a Hell in a Cell match at Survivor Series, which Edge would eventually interfere in that match. So they will also have a few encounters along the way, and Taker winning the Elimination Chamber match at No Way Out to challenge Edge for the world title at WrestleMania. And Taker would defeat Edge to regain the World Heavyweight title. And after a series of matches they had at One Night Stand, which would basically go on to become Extreme Rules, the Edge defeated Undertaker in a TLC match where if the stipulation was that if Taker didn't win, then he would be forced to disappear from the WWE. That wouldn't last very long. Edge and Vicky had their relationship also going on during this time, and they eventually had a bit of a falling out. Eventually, Vicky has no choice but to renegotiate a contract with Undertaker, and that SummerSlam, that would be Edge and Taker inside Hell in a Cell at SummerSlam. And this match was very enjoyable. To me, in my opinion, like I said, this was the last truly great Hell in a Cell match. I mean, you could make an argument about maybe Taker and Triple H from WrestleMania 28, but to me personally, if going from a storyline standpoint and match quality standpoint, I would say that Taker and Edge, in my opinion, was the last truly great Hell in a Cell match in the traditional sense, where you have like these two wrestlers that have been going at each other's throats for so long, so it kind of comes down to this like epic conclusion being the Hell in a Cell match. And when I saw that match, it just really blew me away. There was just a lot of great stuff that we've seen. Edge being the specialty of tables, ladders, and chairs. So Edge would utilize his specialty to his advantage in the Hell in a Cell match, and some few high spots here and there with Edge doing that spear to Undertaker through the fence door. It was a pretty cool scene where like Edge used the steel steps as kind of like a catapult to add leverage and to successfully spear Undertaker through the cage fence. Yeah, there was just a lot of cool stuff, with Edge and doing the table spot that he did, like he did to Mick Foley on the SmackDown leading into SummerSlam. So Edge also alluded to that and using that chair that he had and just using that to add insult to injury on the Undertaker. Undertaker would eventually get the win over Edge. Also, my favorite moment was actually during the post-match where Undertaker would go back in the ring. He would try and put Edge on top of the ladder. Undertaker chokeslams Edge through the ring canvas, and then afterwards, like Undertaker started raising the flames using his parlor tricks and causing the fire to erupt from the ring canvas, and then indicating a sign that Edge was literally being taken to hell. Yeah, I definitely really enjoyed this match, and that's why it's at number 5. And this would be the last Hell in a Cell match before next year, when we would start the traditional Hell in a Cell gimmick-based pay-per-views that have been going on to this very day. Hell in a Cell matches haven't been the same, and just being reserved for a particular pay-per-view, aside from maybe a few instances where they would have Hell in a Cell matches and like WrestleMania. Other than those few exceptions, I mean, Hell in a Cell matches just lost their luster. I mean, I know that WWE had already been going PG by this point, but even still, even despite the fact that this was like a month or two removed from the announcement that WWE was shifting towards a more kid-friendly product, but at the same time, they were still doing a lot of cutting-edge content like they had been doing for many years since the Attitude Era and even during the post-Attitude, or what many fans refer to as the Ruthless Aggression era. So it took a while for WWE to gradually change into the more kid-friendly product that we ended up getting for the next several years. They did manage to get away with a little bit of that, especially the part where Taker chokeslams Edge and then he raises the fire from the ring canvas. I mean, it was still a pretty great match. They really pulled out all the stops here, so that's why it's at number 5. But then we get to number 4, another match that involves Edge, and this is the first ever TLC match between the Hardys, Dudleys, and the champions being Edge and Christian from SummerSlam 2000. These three teams had already had their encounter at WrestleMania 2000, but that was a triangle ladder match. Now, that match would be easily mistaken for a TLC match, because I remember when I was a little kid, I could have sworn that that match was already a TLC match, because they did, however, emphasize on the tables, and I believe they might have emphasized on the chairs to some degree. That match would be easily mistaken to be the first ever TLC match, even though technically that was only just a traditional ladder match, but with 3 teams. But here we get to do the same thing, only this time that this would be a tables and chairs, and to kind of add to that 3-team ladder match. So it basically plays out the same, just with the addition of 2 weapons, just to kind of really establish the characters and their weapon specialty that they had. So the Dudleys had the tables, Edge and Christian had the chairs, the Hardys had the ladders. So all these 3 tag teams had their own respective weapon usage, and they really meshed their characters and really put them together to make this a TLC match. This match was definitely really enjoyable. And being that this was in Raleigh, North Carolina, being the home state of the Hardys, so I thought going into this that the Hardys were going to go on to win the tag title belts here, but unfortunately that was not the case, and that Edge and Christian would go on to win the match. However, they did go on to fight the Hardys a couple times, especially in that steel cage match at Unforgiven, which the Hardys won, and then they had like a match on the first Raw since moving from the USA Network to TNN, which basically is now the Paramount Network, the national network, as it was called during that time. And they would have another ladder match. But this was just a straight up great match. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you check it out. And I know this match kind of gets overshadowed by their WrestleMania 17, which is likely their most memorable TLC match that they had. The Hardys, Dudleys, Andrew Christian did have another series of TLC matches, especially being WrestleMania 17 and on the SmackDown Extreme Edition, but that had like Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho as the tag champs. There was just a lot of amazing encounters that they had, and this one really takes the cake, being that this is the first TLC match and the second encounter of these 3 teams. So definitely really enjoyed it, and that's why it's at number 4. Number 3 I have is Rock vs. Brock for the undisputed title at SummerSlam 2002. Now, Brock Lesnar had won the King of the Ring 2002, and this was just months removed after his debut after WrestleMania 18. The Rock had been returning to the WWE after promoting the Scorpion King, and this was just in the midst of Stone Cold walking out of the WWE. So Rock basically coming back, and he would go on to win the undisputed title in a triple threat match from Kurt Angle and then champion The Undertaker at Vengeance. So Rock would go on to have that title reign, and it would last a month. Brock Lesnar winning the King of the Ring earned him a number 1 contender shot against the WWF title, or actually at this point, by this time, the WWF had become the WWE. So this was for the undisputed title. And so we go to SummerSlam 2002. This was Madison Square Garden, which was the venue that Rock had made his in-ring debut. Ironically enough, Rock ended up getting booed at the same place where he made his debut. Brock Lesnar was just coming in hot. Despite being the heel, he was the manager for Paul Heyman. And both wrestlers were pulling out all the stops. They really did a really great job with the video package and emphasizing on both Rock and Brock's athleticism. It was a great emphasis on the sort of the athleticism that both Rock and Brock have emphasized on. And this leads into this match at SummerSlam. The crowd was cheering for Brock. They were booing Rock. I mean, Rock was starting to slowly transition from professional wrestling into Hollywood. So it was a pretty clear indicator that the Rock that we had grown to love the past few years was sort of on the decline. So this would actually be the Rock's last match for a couple months. Brock would eventually defeat the Rock to win the undisputed title, become the youngest world heavyweight champion. So this would be a crowning moment for Brock, and he would go on to hold that belt for a couple months. So this was a really great match, really passing the torch from The Rock to Brock Lesnar, the Attitude Era to what would eventually be, in retrospect, be known as the Ruthless Aggression Era. Brock being this unstoppable beast. I remember just being saddened by the fact that Brock was just destroying everyone in their sight. Like, he would be, like, a couple of weeks before this, like, he was decimating Hulk Hogan. Brock, when they debuted him the first 5-6 months in the company, I mean, I just really believed that, with Brock, it's just like this unstoppable bully that couldn't be contained. I just remember part of me just kind of felt ashamed that The Rock wasn't able to defeat the beast of Brock Lesnar at the time. Rock would eventually come back in 2003, basically sporting a whole new look with the shaved head that he still has to this day, the tattoos, and a new theme song, and just a new attitude, and basically the Hollywood Rock, which is actually a pretty good run of The Rock, especially during the first couple months of 2003. I definitely really enjoyed this match. I guess I could say an end of an era of sorts, the end of the classic Rock and the transition into the Hollywood Rock that we've known him to this day. I definitely really enjoyed this match, so that's why it's on number 3. Number 2, we're going to go back a year prior to that, and this was Stone Cold versus Kurt Angle for the WWF title at SummerSlam 2001. Now, Stone Cold, as far as his heel run is concerned, I mean, what's more to be said? I mean, at WrestleMania 17, he sides with the devil and Vince McMahon after years and years of them going at each other's throat. Stone Cold's heel run would be another entirely different topic for another day. Stone Cold and Kurt Angle had their partnership going on a little after Triple H got injured. So he and Kurt Angle had this sort of love triangle with Vince McMahon just to see who was the better loyal follower to Vince. And then the invasion angle was kicking in because this was months removed from WWE's purchase of WCW and ECW. So they had this the pay-per-view devoted to the promotional warfare between WWE, WCW, and ECW. So they had this multi-man tag main event. Stone Cold turns on Kurt Angle and the rest of WWF, even despite the little tease of whether Stone Cold would truly represent the WWE. Vince McMahon just telling that we need the old Stone Cold back, and we did get the old Stone Cold back for one night, and then he ends up turning on the entire WWF locker room, including Kurt Angle. So this eventually leads to a program between the two at SummerSlam. This is probably like the most over Kurt Angle has been in his entire wrestling career. And, Stone Cold being also a fan favorite for a long time, joining the dark side, being the villain that we all thought at the time that he would never become. This would be one of the few cases where fans actually really rallied for Kurt Angle this time. It led some really great matches, especially here at SummerSlam. I thought for sure that Kurt Angle was going to be the one to finally take down Stone Cold and bring the WWF title back to where it belongs, but that wasn't the case here. There was a bit of disqualification where There would be referees getting knocked out, like Stone Cold would knock down one referee, and then another referee would come out only to get knocked down afterward. This out of control tactics would result in a disqualification, and because of the fact that a title can't change hands via disqualification, Stone Cold would still be WWE champion. So Kurt Angle just gets immediately frustrated, and he's just attacking the referees and just so bummed that he wasn't able to retrieve the WWE title. They would go on to have another match at Unforgiven. Kurt Angle would win the title there in his hometown, and that was actually a really great moment. I really wish a moment like this actually happened at SummerSlam. I mean, it is what it is, and it was just an all-out great match, and just probably the best of Kurt Angle's wrestling career, probably the most over that he has been in the 2 years that he was in the company up until that point. And just to see Kurt going from the undercard guy that people can't stand, that take your vitamins, say your prayer, evolving into kind of like the Olympic hero that he would eventually become. So there was actually a pretty good story that they told, and just Kurt just climbing up the ladder in such a short amount of time, eventually getting to the promised land and such. So I definitely really enjoyed this match, and that's why it's at number 2. Now, my number 1 top 10 favorite matches of the 2000s. This is the match from SummerSlam 2002. And we have is the non-sanctioned street fight between Triple H and Shawn Michaels. This match was actually a lot better than it had every right to be, considering that this would be Shawn Michaels' first match since his back injury, and especially since his match at WrestleMania 14 against Stone Cold. I mean, this match is just, holy shit, it really showed just how much Shawn Michaels, just to see him completely sober, he's got his act together. Shawn Michaels definitely sobered up by this point, and he was 100%. This match, I mean, I wasn't sure what to think about this. I mean, I was surprisingly impressed by how the match turned out. The build-up was actually really good. At Vengeance, Triple H had a decision whether or not to stay on SmackDown or go to Raw, where Shawn Michaels, who had already returned after a little short stint with the NWO. And so the NWO disbanded, and Triple H made his decision to go to Raw and reunite with Shawn and reunite DX in the process. Or at least so we thought at the time, until Triple H pedigrees Shawn Michaels out of nowhere. And there was also a couple instances along the way where there was a backstage assault on Shawn Michaels, and they spent weeks trying to figure out who was the suspect responsible for Shawn's attack, and it turns out that it was actually Triple H. So this leads into this match here at SummerSlam. Yeah, this was actually a very enjoyable match, and I knew it was going to be a pretty good match, but I didn't expect it to be as like spectacular, like something you were going to remember for a long time. And it really surprised a lot of people, including myself. And there was just a lot of really cool spots that they did with, Shawn Michaels trying to do a body splash at the wooden table on the Triple H. There's just a lot of storytelling going on with Triple H trying to work on the back, considering that Shawn Michaels did happen to retire due to a back injury, and Triple H using a backbreaker and just doing everything that he can to really destroy Shawn Michaels. So there was just a lot of back and forth stuff, just a lot of suspense here, a lot of really cool spots, and especially with the emphasis of the weapons. Triple H tried to go for a pedigree, and Shawn Michaels reversed it into a jackknife bridge to get the 3 count. So Shawn Michaels won the match. Triple H just assaults Shawn Michaels from behind, hits him with the sledgehammer, and basically that was the match in the nutshell. I mean, little did we realize that this particular match would signify what would turn out to be HBK's official return, because once he came back at Survivor Series and being involved in the first ever Elimination Chamber match, and would go on to become the World Heavyweight Champion, indicates that Shawn Michaels is back full time, and he would go on to have his success for the next several years. I mean, this match really brought Shawn Michaels back in his A game, and just really showed that he had plenty of gas left in him, and that's why it's at number 1 on my list. So there you go. That's my top 10 lists for my favorite SummerSlam matches of the 2000s. Let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below. Are there some matches that I left out that you would personally include in your list? Feel free to comment down in the comment section below. Thank you all guys for watching, and until then, this is the Gold Standard Caesar 924 signing out.